Back in 2015, I met a landlord on Craigslist who was eager to sell his rundown property with a tenant who refused to pay his full rent. It was going to be my first venture into real estate, and I was excited about the opportunity. However, things took an unexpected turn during our initial meeting. The man I met was a short, stocky old white man in his late 50s or early 60s. As we discussed the property, he suggested we finalize the deal at his house where I was introduced to his wife. That's when I sensed something was off. His wife, with a peculiar mannerism, proceeded to give me an uncomfortably long and intimate grasp on waist hug. It felt like an eternity, and I couldn't help but feel uneasy. To make things stranger, the landlord was casually sitting in the kitchen, enjoying his food, and acting as if nothing unusual was happening. His wife continued the odd embrace, almost as if we were long-lost lovers, all while asking me questions as if everything was perfectly normal. The whole situation was surreal, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. Adding to the peculiarity of the encounter, their adopted son, who appeared to be around 17, 19 years old at the time, was casually sitting on the couch, engrossed in watching TV. It was clear to me that this behavior was not in line with typical American culture, as I have been here since I was 16. In the United States, it's not customary for a married woman to hug a stranger hip to hip for an extended period as if it's a normal occurrence. Little did I know, this bizarre meeting was just the beginning of the strange events that would unfold in the course of this real estate transaction. To explain how I found myself in this strange situation, let me start from the beginning. I was relocated to a seemingly forgotten town in Illinois to work for a construction equipment manufacturing company as an engineer. Some of you might know the company, as it's an American icon, but I'll keep the town name anonymous to remain discreet. The plan was to work there for a year before having the opportunity to move to a location of my choice. It was one of those positions where you had to gain experience to advance within the company. At that time, I was just 24 years old, armed with an advanced engineering degree. I had migrated to the United States from Nigeria during my high school years, seeking new opportunities. When I say the town was dying, I mean it in every sense. Many areas were struggling, with the majority of people being Black, Hispanic, and some white residents. The richer neighborhoods were predominantly white, and the property taxes were ridiculously high. The stark contrast between the haves and the have-nots was evident, with the poorer areas grappling with crime issues. It was a challenging environment to navigate, but my focus was on gaining the experience I needed to progress in my career. Little did I know that my journey would take an unexpected turn when I decided to explore real estate in this peculiar town, leading me to that strange encounter with the landlord and his family. As I mentioned earlier, the town was on a decline and property prices were incredibly low. Since I didn't have much else to do besides working and counting down the 1-year mark for relocation, I developed an interest in real estate. Despite my relatively poor investment acumen at the time, I believed I could make a smart move in this market. The idea was to purchase several low-cost properties, renovate them, and then rent them out. Little did I know the reality of the situation would soon hit me. Most of the houses in the town were quite old, and their condition turned out to be worse than their low prices suggested. In my excitement, I didn't realize that the cost of fixing these houses often exceeded their actual value. Nevertheless, my enthusiasm got the better of me, and I impulsively decided to acquire my first property at that time. Looking back, it remains the worst property I have ever acquired to date. The challenges I faced with that initial property purchase taught me valuable lessons about real estate, and it marked the beginning of a journey filled with unexpected twists and turns in this declining town. Little did I know that the strangeness I encountered during the acquisition of that first property was just a prelude to the even stranger events that awaited me. So, inspired by a real estate podcast called Bigger Pockets that I found on YouTube, I decided to dive deeper into the world of real estate. I took the real estate exam and passed it, not with the intention of becoming a real estate agent, but because I wanted to equip myself with comprehensive knowledge about the ins and outs of real estate. As I continued my quest for a potential property investment, I stumbled upon a listing on Craigslist for a property priced at less than 15 grand in cash. Intrigued, I reached out to the landlord, whose name I had noted, expressing my interest in buying the property. We arranged to meet at the location, and that's when I got my first taste of the challenges that awaited me. Upon arrival, I discovered that the property was currently occupied by a foul-mouthed, hoarding elderly man who refused to pay the full rent. Naive to the complexities of evicting someone in Illinois and completely unaware of the additional challenges, such as a massive tree growing dangerously close to the house and the daunting task of cleaning up a roach and rat-infested dwelling, I decided to purchase the house. Excitement over landing my first property overshadowed the reality of what I had unwittingly gotten myself into. Little did I know, this decision would mark the beginning of a series of unforeseen and peculiar events in my real estate journey. The dynamic between the landlord and the tenant was far from amicable. The 70-year-old tenant, feeling entitled, believed he should pay whatever he wanted for the rent. He argued that the property had originally been occupied by one of his relatives who had moved to Florida, leaving him behind. He was covering the rent with his Social Security income. In hindsight, this should have been a glaring red flag, a sign to reconsider the whole venture. But, fueled by my eagerness to embark on a new project, gain real estate experience, and take on an affordable property, I overlooked the warning signs. Despite the initial confrontations, my interactions with the landlord were surprisingly positive. He was curious and asked me numerous questions. We decided to meet again at a restaurant to discuss the necessary documents for the property transaction. It seemed like a straightforward plan to move forward, unaware of the complications and peculiarities that awaited me in the chapters of this real estate journey. Little did I know that this seemingly innocent meeting would lead to an even more bizarre turn of events. It seemed I had made a good impression on the landlord during our initial meetings. He went home and shared details about me with his wife, which I later found out when he provided me with his home address for our final meeting to sign the real estate documents and make the payment. During our conversations, he opened up about his life, mentioning that they had adopted their son because his wife either couldn't have children or chose not to. I wasn't entirely sure as I wasn't paying too much attention to his personal life. My main focus was on signing the documents, making the payment, and getting to work on the property. I wasn't there to be his friend. He also mentioned that his wife worked as a school teacher. We decided not to involve a closing company since the property was so inexpensive, and we aimed to keep the transaction as cost-free as possible. I can't recall exactly why he wanted me to sign the documents at his house. Perhaps he wanted me to see his home or meet his family. What stuck in my memory was that our plan was to meet at his house to complete the necessary paperwork and finalize the payment. Little did I know that this seemingly routine meeting would unravel into one of the strangest experiences. Upon arriving at his house, I was taken aback by how nice it looked and its location in town. Given the landlord's rough exterior and limp, I hadn't expected him to live in such a pleasant area despite owning some properties. As we walked through his garage, I passed by the kitchen and encountered his wife. She appeared to be in her early 50s, just an ordinary, pleasant white woman, one you might expect to see at a university or working in a library. The kitchen and living room were attached, and I can still vividly picture the mosaic wallpaper that adorned their home. I remember the details of that moment, the image of his wife in a long dress, exuding a kind and friendly demeanor. She seemed like an average, unremarkable woman to me at the time, not someone who immediately caught my attention in a romantic or sexual way. It was just a casual encounter, or so I thought, in what appeared to be an ordinary, comfortable home. Little did I know that this unassuming meeting would soon take an unexpected turn, revealing the peculiarities hidden beneath the surface of this seemingly normal facade. As soon as she saw me, she called me by my name and enthusiastically came forward to give me a hug, crouch to crouch. Meanwhile, her husband sat in the kitchen, munching on nuts and talking about me to his wife while she was hugging me. As this went on, I noticed their adopted son, a tall kid, engrossed in watching TV. At that moment, I wasn't aware, but I would later discover that he was autistic. While she continued to hug me, crouch to crouch, she asked if I would like to visit her school and teach her students about Raspberry Pi. I felt utterly confused as she posed these seemingly normal questions while maintaining an uncomfortably close embrace. Her lips were almost touching mine, and I could taste the air from her words. The hug felt like it went on for an eternity, and I found myself agreeing to everything she was saying just to get through the awkward situation. Eventually, she must have sensed my discomfort, and she let go. She went to the backyard, leaving me standing there watching her tend to the garden through the screen door. The encounter left me feeling uneasy and bewildered, unsure of what had just transpired in the midst of this peculiar meeting at the landlord's house. Little did I know that this discomforting episode was just a hint of the strange events that would unfold in the months to come. The son remained focused on whatever he was doing in the living room and never glanced in my direction. After signing the documents and paying the landlord in cash, he kindly offered me something to eat, but I declined swiftly. I signed the paperwork, handed over the payment, breathed a sigh of relief, and made a quick exit from his house. The following day, I went to inspect the property, and the old man was there. I hoped I could logically convince him to vacate without resorting to eviction. However, this marked the beginning of a nightmare. The extent of the property's dilapidation wasn't immediately apparent due to the sheer amount of stuff inside. It turned out the man, along with his family members that lived there years ago before they abandoned him, were hoarders. The house was filled with cats, feces, and roaches, I couldn't fathom how anyone could live in such conditions. In hindsight, I should have been more compassionate, considering leaving the old man there and accepting whatever little he offered to pay. Rehabbing the property didn't seem worth it, given the high costs and the property's diminished value, a realization I would sadly come to later. However, at that time, driven by boredom, boundless energy, and a willingness to put in sweat equity to save the property, I decided to proceed. I started the eviction process after weeks of attempting to negotiate with the old man to leave peacefully, a task that would prove to be much more challenging than I initially anticipated. During the eviction process, the landlord who sold me the property invited me to join him at the bar to hang out. However, I turned down the offer even though I could have gone. I had more important things to focus on, such as searching for another property to buy while waiting for the eviction process to run its course. Additionally, I wasn't interested in becoming friends with the landlord, especially after the awkward encounter with his wife. Returning to their house wasn't something I wanted to do. Fast forward a few months, and I finally managed to evict the old tenant. However, it wasn't without consequences. In a vengeful move, the old man retaliated by getting the city to condemn the property. Anyone with a shred of common sense would consider the property unfit for habitation, and now I had to bring everything up to code, a task that would cost about 3 times the property's worth. The old man had assistance from a relative who seemed to embody the Karen stereotype. When I questioned why she didn't take him in if she cared so much about him, she gave the excuse that she had 5 kids, what seemed like a typical trailer trash situation. Dealing with lazy and entitled people, it became clear why the landlord was quick to offload the property to me. Maybe he did mention these potential issues, but at the time, my eagerness to dive into real estate might have blinded me to these warning signs. Now, looking back, I've learned a lot from this real estate experience. It has shaped my perspective, and I can almost write a book on why, for me, the only reason to buy real estate now would be to store profits and use it as leverage. I'm no longer keen on primarily buying real estate for income generation, as I've discovered more profitable ventures. But that's a story for another day. Despite what seemed like the end of any association between the landlord and me, he persisted in inviting me out, acting like we were friends. I continued turning down his invitations until one day he sent me a picture. It featured him and his wife dressed up for a banquet, him in a tuxedo and his wife in a black fur dress, mingling with what he claimed were professional people. He even mentioned that the town mayor was in one of the pictures, or at least that's who he said it was. I never bothered to fact check. In a small town, assumptions sometimes pass as reality. We resumed texting and he extended an invitation to his house for dinner. Given that I didn't have many friends and was exhausted from working on the 2 properties I had bought, I decided to accept his offer. Upon arriving at his house, I found it was just him, his son, and his wife. This time, his wife didn't prolong the hug, but she sat next to me at the dining table asking me questions. I thought she was just a kind, elderly lady impressed by my educational achievements, as that was the focus of her inquiries. It was during this time that I noticed something off with their son. After dinner, they invited me to watch movies with them. How could I refuse? Politeness dictated that I be a gracious guest after a wonderful dinner and a normal evening, quite unlike the previous awkward encounter. I felt more at ease this time around. I was genuinely amazed by how good their relationship seemed. They acted like teenagers, engaging in playful competitions, like seeing who could finish their water first. The atmosphere was light and playful, making me feel quite comfortable. I started thinking that maybe I had misjudged them. Their bond was undeniably strong, and I genuinely enjoyed their company. However, things took an awkward turn when I moved to the couch to watch TV, and their son went into his room. The wife then came over with a blanket, covering both of us and sitting close to me. Meanwhile, her husband, the landlord, took another chair. It felt strange and uncomfortable as she leaned on my shoulder, a gesture that I felt should have been reserved for her husband. The situation became even more peculiar when they turned off the lights to watch the movie. Before long, she started touching me under the blanket, and I reciprocated. Glancing across, I noticed that her husband was now asleep. The whole scenario was becoming increasingly uncomfortable and confusing. She asked me if I wanted to go to the bedroom, and by this point, I knew exactly what she was suggesting. We ended up in the bedroom and had the most uncomfortable and awkward encounter, with protection. I didn't enjoy it at all. My mind was racing with thoughts like, what if her husband shows up? Is he aware of what his wife is doing? I had so many questions during the act that I couldn't wait to get away from the situation. It all felt extremely strange and unsettling. Looking back, I wish someone had told me that they were in an open relationship or something similar. At least then, I might have been able to relax a bit. However, at the time, I believed she was taking advantage of her husband, and I was clueless about concepts like open relationships or cuckolding. It wasn't until almost 3 years later in 2018 when I started using Reddit and came across it on lewd sites that I became familiar with these ideas. The experience with the landlord and his wife was bewildering, and it left me with a mix of discomfort and confusion. After that night, I made a decision not to pick up his calls or respond to his texts. I worried that he might find out about what happened with his wife and potentially plan something against me. Instead, I focused on my job and rehabbing the 2 properties I now owned. In short, my real estate endeavor in that forsaken town turned out to be a flop. I didn't want to invest in more properties in that city because I began realizing that the city itself was in decline. No matter how much effort and investment I put into the properties, the returns wouldn't match the value. I didn't stress too much about it since my time there was coming to an end, and I was getting ready to move back to Texas. I was tired of the cold and the slow pace of that dying town, and I was eager for a change. I managed to complete the rehab on the 2 properties, but it came at a significant loss. Despite getting tenants, they later refused to pay rent. Eventually, I grew tired of dealing with these properties and decided to donate them. It allowed me to use the donation as a tax write-off. While I don't regret buying the properties, the experience taught me valuable skills in plumbing, wiring, contracting, and property management, even if only for a short period. Through this journey, I discovered there are easier ways to make money than fix and hold real estate. Now happily married, I currently don't own any properties. I found that maintaining my day job and trading stocks during market correction cycles is a more stress-free way to live life. I never responded to the landlord's attempts to contact me again, but I often reflect on that experience. If only I had known they were in an open relationship, or that he was a cuckold, perhaps I could have approached the situation with more understanding and relax and laid the pipe correctly on that kind lady.